Maximilian Jacob was at a political gala, speaking to a crowd about his vision for reform. He noticed Carlos Vega across the room, a man with a calm demeanor and sharp intelligence, not a politician, but a strategist with a way of reading people. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, a spark that neither could ignore. After the event, Maximilian found himself approaching Carlos, sensing an immediate connection. Their conversation began with polite small talk but quickly deepened into a discussion about political ideologies, personal ambitions, and hidden desires. Neither of them knew it at the time, but their first encounter would set the stage for a life they would build together. In the months that followed, Maximilian and Carlos found themselves meeting more often, sometimes at campaign events, sometimes at private meetings. It wasn't long before their conversations turned more personal. Maximilian admired Carlos' level-headed approach to everything, especially when it came to handling sensitive political issues. Carlos, in turn, was drawn to Maximilian's fiery passion for change, though he often wondered if Maximilian knew how deeply he was becoming attached to him. Late one evening, as they walked together through the quiet streets of the city after a political fundraiser, Maximilian took a risk. "Carlos, there's something about you that pulls me in," he admitted, his voice soft but certain. Carlos stopped, his gaze steady. "I feel it too," he said quietly, "but we can't let this get in the way of what we're doing here." Maximilian nodded. They both knew the risks, yet the magnetic pull between them was undeniable. But they agreed to keep their connection hidden for now. Their relationship grew in secret. The political landscape they navigated was unforgiving to personal attachments, especially one that didn't fit the typical image of a powerful politician. Their stolen moments were rare, often shared behind closed doors. In private, their love was explosive, raw, and vulnerable. Maximilian was an open book in the bedroom, while Carlos was more reserved, but just as passionate when their lips met. A kiss could linger for minutes, their bodies pressed against each other in a silent promise. Yet, every kiss, every touch, was overshadowed by the fear of being exposed. They had to be careful, always aware of the eyes around them. They made love like they were fighting for something greater, each caress a battle against the political machine that might tear them apart. Carlos had always been a man of strategy, but there was something about Maximilian's approach to politics that captivated him. At a particularly tense rally, Maximilian made an impassioned speech about equality, fairness, and change. Carlos watched from the back, his heart swelling with pride. The way Maximilian spoke, the fire in his eyes, the way he made people believe in something better, it was all so intoxicating. Later that night, as they sat together in the quiet of Maximilian's apartment, Carlos kissed him, long and slow, as though time had stopped just for them. The world outside didn't matter, it was just them. Maximilian pulled away gently, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're more than a strategist," he whispered. "You're my anchor." As their love deepened, so did the pressure. Both men were aware of the public scrutiny they were under, and their personal relationship had begun to affect their professional lives. Whispers started circulating within their inner circles. They knew the day would come when their secret would be exposed, but neither of them was ready. One night, at a private dinner, Maximilian grabbed Carlos' hand under the table. The subtle gesture was a reminder of how much they had sacrificed for each other. Just as Maximilian leaned in for a kiss, his phone buzzed with a notification. "Your relationship is about to be exposed," the message read. Carlos, ever the strategist, remained calm. "We'll face it together. You and me," he said, the conviction in his voice unwavering. The press conference was supposed to be routine, an announcement about a new policy initiative. Maximilian stood confidently at the podium, flanked by his team, including Carlos. The reporters were eager, cameras flashing as questions were hurled in rapid succession. But amidst the typical political queries, one reporter broke through the noise. "Senator Jacob, there's speculation about your personal life. Can you comment on the nature of your relationship with Mr. Carlos Herrera?" The room fell silent, the air charged with tension. Maximilian's grip on the podium tightened, his heart racing. Carlos, standing just a few steps behind him, met Maximilian's gaze with a look of steady reassurance. Maximilian knew this moment would come eventually, but he hadn't anticipated it today. With a deep breath, he straightened his shoulders and addressed the crowd. My personal life has always been separate from my work, he began, his voice steady. But since you've asked, I won't hide the truth. Carlos Herrera is more than my colleague. He is my partner, my confidant, and the person I love. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by a barrage of questions. Carlos stepped forward, standing proudly beside Maximilian, his presence a silent but powerful statement. In that moment, they weren't just two men in love, they were a symbol of courage and defiance in a world that often demanded conformity. The fallout from their public revelation was swift and brutal. Political allies distanced themselves, opponents used their relationship as fodder for attacks, and the media dissected every detail of their lives. Yet, amidst the chaos, Maximilian and Carlos found solace in each other. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, they retreated to Maximilian's apartment. The city lights twinkled outside the window, but the world felt far away. Carlos sat on the couch, his tie loosened, exhaustion etched on his face. Maximilian joined him, a glass of wine in each hand. We knew this wouldn't be easy, he said, handing one to Carlos. Carlos took the glass but didn't drink. It's not the attacks that bother me, he admitted. It's the silence from people we thought would stand by us. Maximilian placed a hand on Carlos's cheek, forcing him to meet his gaze. Let them be silent. Their approval doesn't define us. The space between them dissolved, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and fervent. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, unspoken but deeply felt. No matter what the world threw at them, they would face it together. Despite their love, the challenges began to take a toll. Maximilian faced intense scrutiny at work, with colleagues questioning his priorities and commitment. Carlos, too, dealt with attacks on his character and competence. One evening, after a heated argument over how to handle the latest scandal, Carlos stormed out of their shared apartment. Maximilian sat alone, the silence deafening. He replayed their words in his mind, guilt and frustration battling within him. Carlos walked aimlessly through the city, the cool night air doing little to calm his racing thoughts. He knew their fight wasn't about the issue at hand, it was about the pressure, the weight of their circumstances pressing down on them both. Hours later, Carlos returned, his expression weary but resolute. Maximilian stood as he entered, his apology ready. But Carlos spoke first. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I shouldn't have left. Maximilian shook his head, stepping closer. No, I should have listened more. We're in this together, and I need to remember that. They embraced, the tension between them melting away. In each other's arms, they found the strength to keep going. Their love, though tested, remained unbroken, a beacon of hope in the storm of their lives. Despite their brave declaration of love to the world, Maximilian and Carlos found themselves navigating a hostile environment. The media was relentless, constantly picking apart every gesture, every word they spoke. Their relationship, now public, had become a battleground. Maximilian sat across from Carlos in the quiet of their shared apartment, the news on TV in the background as the latest scandalous report about their relationship flickered across the screen. It wasn't just the political allies who had turned against them, a portion of the public had also voiced their disapproval. I never imagined it would be this hard, Maximilian said, his voice tinged with frustration as he ran his fingers through his hair. Carlos looked at him calmly, his hand resting on the table between them. The world is full of people who want to make things harder than they need to be. But the fact remains, this, he gestured between the two of them, is real. And nothing is stronger than what we have. Maximilian exhaled sharply, knowing Carlos was right. It's not just us. There are people depending on us to set an example, to prove that we can overcome anything together. Carlos smiled gently. And we will. That night, they shared a quiet moment together, lying on the couch, Carlos holding Maximilian's hand. Though the world was against them, in this moment, it was just the two of them, and it was enough. As the political climate became more intense, Maximilian and Carlos found an unexpected ally in Eleanor, a powerful senator who had previously kept her distance from their campaign. She had been quiet about her stance on LGBTQ+ rights, but after witnessing the unyielding love between the two men, she made a public statement in support of their relationship. Sometimes, she said in a press conference, It takes courage to stand with those who refuse to hide who they are, to love who they love. I believe in love, real, honest love, and I believe in their fight for equality. The public support helped alleviate some of the pressure, but it also brought new challenges. Their relationship had now become a symbol, and with that came even more eyes on them. Maximilian looked at Carlos after hearing the news. "We've got more than just our love to protect now," he said. Carlos nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. "Then we fight harder. Together." That night, their love deepened in the quiet of their room. Maximilian, his mind full of the future, sought solace in Carlos' arms. Their kisses, slow and tender, became an anchor for both of them. It wasn't just physical, it was a promise that no matter what the world threw their way, they would stand side by side. As their relationship continued to gain more attention, Maximilian felt the pressures mount. He had always been in control of his public image, but now, every action, every moment, was under the microscope. During a fundraising gala, Maximilian stood at the podium, delivering a speech that resonated with his political platform. Carlos stood in the crowd, his eyes never leaving Maximilian's as the words flowed from his partner's lips. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was personal. We fight not just for policies, but for people. For the freedom to love, for the equality that is rightfully ours. Love is love, and we will not be silenced. Maximilian's voice rang out, his gaze now locking with Carlos, unwavering and filled with conviction. The applause that followed was louder than ever, but it wasn't just for Maximilian. It was for both of them. As the crowd celebrated, Maximilian's heart swelled with pride, not just for his work, but for the love he had found in Carlos. Later that night, in the privacy of their shared space, the world seemed far away. Maximilian kissed Carlos deeply, a kiss filled with the intensity of everything they were fighting for. The heat of the kiss was more than just desire, it was an acknowledgement of everything they had overcome together. And everything they still had to face. Months passed, and Maximilian's campaign took center stage as the elections drew closer. But the pressures mounted on every side. An anonymous source leaked a damaging story that could ruin their political careers. The relationship that had once been a symbol of courage now had a shadow cast over it. Maximilian stood in front of Carlos, his face a mask of frustration and anger. "How did this happen?" he demanded. Carlos took a deep breath, placing a calming hand on Maximilian's arm. "We can't let this define us, Maximum. We'll fix this, just like we've handled everything else." But Maximilian couldn't shake the fear that they were losing control. The leak threatened not only their political future but their personal one as well. His confidence wavered, but Carlos remained the steady anchor, always reminding him that they had each other. As they lay together that night, Carlos kissed him softly, breaking the tension. "We'll face it. Together." Maximilian finally relaxed, his trust in Carlos unwavering. Their love was the one thing that could not be compromised. In the face of the scandal, Maximilian made a bold move. He released a statement, not only addressing the leak but also reaffirming his love for Carlos and his commitment to their cause. "I will not be ashamed of who I love," he said publicly. "I will fight for our future, and nothing, not even this, will break us." The response was overwhelming. Some criticized him, but many more showed their support. For the first time in weeks, Maximilian felt a sense of peace, knowing that the truth was out there, and he no longer had to hide. Carlos stood by him, his hand firmly grasping Maximilian's as they faced the media. The storm was far from over, but they were stronger than it. Together, they were unstoppable. That night, they celebrated, not just the victory of overcoming the scandal, but their love. Their kisses were fiery and urgent, a reminder that no obstacle was too great for them. They didn't just fight for politics, they fought for each other. A year had passed since their love became public, and the anniversary was a milestone. It wasn't just about their relationship, it was about the journey they had taken, the battles they had fought, and the love they had built. Maximilian surprised Carlos with a quiet dinner at home. No cameras, no reporters, just the two of them. As they sat across from each other, the weight of the past year melted away in the warmth of their shared space. "To us," Maximilian said, raising his glass. "To everything we've built." Carlos clinked his glass with Maximilian's. to the future? Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, they celebrated their love in the most intimate way. Every kiss was a celebration, every touch a reminder of the bond they had formed. As the election loomed ever closer, Maximilian and Carlos knew that they were not just fighting for themselves anymore, they were fighting for a cause greater than both of them. Their love had transcended their personal lives and had become a symbol of hope for many. Maximilian and Carlos stood together before a crowd at a rally, their hands intertwined. As Maximilian spoke about the future they envisioned, Carlos watched him, his heart full of pride. This was their moment. Together, they would change the world. As the election loomed ever closer, Maximilian and Carlos knew that they were not just fighting for themselves anymore, they were fighting for a cause greater than both of them. Their love had transcended their personal lives and had become a symbol of hope for many. Maximilian and Carlos stood together before a crowd at a rally, their hands intertwined. As Maximilian spoke about the future they envisioned, Carlos watched him, his heart full of pride. As the election neared, the political climate grew more intense. Maximilian and Carlos were at the heart of a storm, their love now a symbol of both hope and defiance. The public was split, some saw them as the epitome of progress, while others viewed them as a challenge to tradition. The weight of their position was heavy, but neither of them wavered. One evening, while reviewing campaign materials, Maximilian turned to Carlos. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? If this battle is worth it?" Carlos smiled softly, his hand reaching for Maximilian's. "We're not just fighting for us, Maximum. We're fighting for anyone who feels like they have to hide who they are. And that's worth everything." Maximilian's heart swelled with pride. He knew Carlos was right. They weren't just political figures anymore, they were symbols of something much bigger than themselves. But the pressure was still overwhelming, and sometimes Maximilian felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Come here," Carlos whispered, pulling Maximilian into his arms. "Let me remind you why we're doing this." Their kiss was slow at first, but as the tension melted away, their passion grew. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a reaffirmation of everything they were fighting for. They had each other, and that was all they needed. The night before the election, Maximilian and Carlos stood together on the balcony of their apartment, looking out at the city below. The world felt at once infinite and small. Maximilian had given everything to this campaign, his time, his heart, his soul. But the outcome was still uncertain. "What if we don't win?" Maximilian asked, the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "What if this is all for nothing?" Carlos turned him to face him, his eyes filled with unwavering resolve. "If we don't win, it's not because we didn't fight. It's because the world isn't ready for us yet. But we're paving the way for future generations. And we've already won." Maximilian smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. In Carlos's eyes, he saw not just the love they shared but the future they were building together. As the night deepened, they held each other close, their bodies pressed together in a quiet moment of solidarity. Tomorrow would be a new day, no matter the outcome. But for now, they had each other. The results were in, and Maximilian had won. The nation had chosen him, not just for his politics, but for his courage, his authenticity, and his unwavering love for Carlos. It was a bittersweet victory. While the applause was deafening, Maximilian knew that this would be just the beginning of a new chapter, filled with even greater challenges. The morning after the win, as the sun filtered through their bedroom window, Carlos woke up to Maximilian's gaze fixed on him. "We did it," Maximilian said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm scared, Carlos. I'm scared of what comes next." Carlos kissed him gently, his touch soft yet firm. "We face it together. We've faced everything else, and we can face this, too." Maximilian smiled, the weight in his chest easing slightly. "Together," he repeated, savoring the word. Later that day, they stood together on stage during Maximilian's victory speech. The crowd cheered, but Maximilian only had eyes for Carlos, the man who had been his constant support through it all. "I am here today because I believe in love. And I believe that love is powerful enough to change the world. No matter what happens, Carlos and I will keep fighting, for each other, and for all of you," Maximilian declared. The applause that followed was deafening, and as the crowd roared, Maximilian's heart soared. They had done it. And nothing could tear them apart. Though Maximilian's victory was a momentous achievement, the aftermath was not without its costs. The political battles didn't stop once the election was over. Now, Maximilian faced the constant barrage of expectations and scrutiny from both allies and adversaries. His relationship with Carlos, once celebrated, was now weaponized by opponents looking for any crack to exploit. During a strategy meeting, Maximilian could see the tension mounting. His political advisors were concerned about the backlash against his public relationship with Carlos. "This is a risk, Max," one of his aides warned. "It's going to cost us votes." Maximilian stood tall, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He glanced at Carlos, who stood beside him, unwavering. "I'm not going to hide who I am. And I'm not going to apologize for loving Carlos. If that costs me votes, then so be it." Carlos's eyes softened, his voice low but steady. "We've faced worse than this. And we're stronger than anyone thinks." Maximilian nodded, feeling the strength in Carlos's words. It wasn't just the election they were fighting for, it was their future, together. And no matter what, they would stand united. The constant public scrutiny began to take its toll on their relationship. Though they had each other, the pressure of being in the public eye was difficult to navigate. They had their fair share of arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But even in the hardest times, they always came back to each other. One evening, after a particularly tense day filled with media questions and political wrangling, Carlos and Maximilian retreated to their private space. They had learned to lean on each other more than ever before. Carlos turned to Maximilian, his eyes searching. "You're not alone in this, you know. I'm here, always." Maximilian smiled, his heart swelling. "I know. I'm sorry for the times I've made you feel like you were carrying the weight with me." Carlos cupped his face gently, leaning in to kiss him softly. "We carry this together. All of it." Their kiss deepened, slow and tender, a silent promise of resilience. In that moment, they knew that no matter what life threw their way, they had each other, and that was enough. The pressure finally reached its breaking point when a scandalous rumor began to circulate, threatening to derail their progress. Maximilian and Carlos, once the golden couple of the campaign, were now facing the possibility of being torn apart. "Max, we have to address this," Carlos said one evening, his voice tense. "If we don't, they'll continue to use us as their target." Maximilian nodded, his heart heavy. "I know. I just..." Before he could finish, Carlos stepped forward, his hand resting firmly on Maximilian's chest. "We fight for this. We've come this far, and we can't let them take what we've built." Maximilian met Carlos's eyes, his resolve firming. "Together," he whispered. And together, they did. They took to the media, addressing the rumors head-on, refusing to let the world dictate their narrative. Their unity was undeniable. And though the storm was far from over, they had made a stand that could not be ignored. Despite the political turmoil, Maximilian and Carlos found solace in the quiet moments they shared. Away from the cameras, the rallies, and the noise, they carved out time for themselves. It wasn't always easy, but they made it work. One evening, after a long day, they sat together on their balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Maximilian leaned against Carlos, his eyes closing as he took a deep breath. "I don't know what the future holds," Maximilian murmured, "but I know I want to spend it with you." Carlos kissed the top of his head, his voice gentle. "The future doesn't matter if we don't have each other. We've got everything we need right here." Maximilian nodded, his heart heavy. "I know. I just..." Before he could finish, Carlos stepped forward, his hand resting firmly on Maximilian's chest. "We fight for this. We've come this far, and we can't let them take what we've built." Maximilian met Carlos's eyes, his resolve firming. "Together," he whispered. And together, they did. They took to the media, addressing the rumors head-on, refusing to let the world dictate their narrative. Their unity was undeniable. And though the storm was far from over, they had made a stand that could not be ignored. Despite the political turmoil, Maximilian and Carlos found solace in the quiet moments they shared. Away from the cameras, the rallies, and the noise, they carved out time for themselves. It wasn't always easy, but they made it work. One evening, after a long day, they sat together on their balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Maximilian leaned against Carlos, his eyes closing as he took a deep breath. "I don't know what the future holds," Maximilian murmured, "but I know I want to spend it with you." Carlos kissed the top of his head, his voice gentle. "The future doesn't matter if we don't have each other. We've got everything we need right here." And in that moment, the world outside seemed a little less daunting. They had each other, and that was all they needed. Maximilian and Carlos knew that the battles they faced weren't just about political victories, they were about creating a legacy of love, equality, and justice. As Maximilian continued to fight for policies that would make a difference, he knew that his greatest achievement would always be the love he shared with Carlos. "We're more than just politicians," Maximilian said one night, his voice filled with conviction. "We're advocates for a future where love isn't limited by anything, least of all politics." Carlos nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "And that's the legacy we'll leave." Their future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: together, they would change the world. Maximilian stood on the steps of the Capitol building, the cold wind brushing against his face as he gazed out at the sea of people before him. Today was the culmination of everything they had fought for, the moment that would define not just his career, but his legacy. The crowd was electric, waiting for his final speech of his term, a speech he had been preparing for years. Carlos stood beside him, his hand resting on Maximilian's arm, an unspoken promise of support. Maximilian squeezed his hand, his heart beating in tandem with the crowd's anticipation. "Today," Maximilian began, his voice steady and clear, "we celebrate love, not just the love between two people, but the love that binds us all. For too long, we've let fear and division define us. But together, we are stronger than that. We are more than the sum of our differences." The crowd erupted into applause, and Maximilian turned to Carlos, his partner, his love, his everything. Carlos smiled, and in his eyes, Maximilian saw the reflection of all they had endured together. They had won, not just in politics, but in life. Maximilian took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the people who had supported them through thick and thin. "This is not the end of our fight, but the beginning of something bigger than all of us. We will continue to fight for justice, equality, and love. And we will never stop." The crowd roared, but for Maximilian, the loudest sound was the steady beat of his heart. He had Carlos by his side, and with that, he knew they could face anything. Carlos pulled him into a brief, private embrace, his voice a soft whisper against Maximilian's ear. "We've made it, Maximum, together." Maximilian kissed him gently, their lips meeting in a slow, passionate kiss, a kiss that spoke volumes more than words ever could. It was a kiss of victory, of triumph over adversity, and of love that had survived every storm. As they pulled away, their foreheads resting against each other, Maximilian knew that their journey was far from over. But with Carlos beside him, he had everything he needed to face the future. The years that followed were filled with triumphs and challenges, but through it all, Maximilian and Carlos remained the heart of the movement they had started. They were no longer just political figures or symbols of hope, they were the embodiment of love itself. And their love continued to inspire not just the people they led, but the generations to come. Their story became a legend, told and retold in history books, documentaries, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed their journey. They had proven that love was the greatest force of all. One evening, after a particularly emotional ceremony celebrating their journey, Maximilian and Carlos returned home, feeling a quiet peace between them. The house was still, the lights dimmed, casting shadows that danced gently on the walls. The world outside might have been a whirlwind of expectation, but here, in this space, it was just the two of them. Maximilian turned to Carlos, his heart full of gratitude. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked softly, his voice carrying a hint of wonder. Carlos smiled, brushing his thumb lightly across Maximilian's cheek. "Every day. It's like waking up from a dream, but the dream is real." Maximilian leaned into the touch, closing his eyes for a moment. The journey, the highs, the lows, everything had led them here. Together, they had built something that was more than just love, it was a movement, a legacy. You've always been my strength, Maximilian said quietly. In every moment, every challenge, I've found a reason to keep going, because of you. Carlos' eyes softened, and he pulled Maximilian closer, wrapping his arms around him. And you, Maximum. You gave me a reason to believe in more than just survival. You made me believe in love. In us. They stood there for a long while, just holding each other, the world outside fading away. In this moment, it was only the two of them. Maximilian could feel Carlos's heartbeat against his chest, a steady rhythm that matched his own. Carlos leaned down, capturing Maximilian's lips in a gentle, lingering kiss. It wasn't about passion this time. It was a kiss of reassurance, of the profound love they had cultivated over the years, a love that had been tested and had only grown stronger. As their lips met, time seemed to slow, and in that kiss, Maximilian could taste the promise of everything they had been through and everything they still had yet to face. Carlos pulled away slightly, his forehead resting against Maximilian's. Together, he whispered, "We've changed the world." Maximilian smiled, a soft laugh escaping him. "And will continue to." Years later, Maximilian and Carlos stood side by side once again, but this time, the air was different. There was no pressure of a speech to give, no world-changing moment hanging in the balance. It was just them, standing in the quiet of their life, knowing that their love had already done everything it needed to do. Their work had shaped the future, their love had inspired millions, but now, they simply had each other. And that was enough. As they walked through the garden of their home, their hands intertwined, Carlos turned to Maximilian, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Maximilian smiled, squeezing his hand. "Does it matter?" Carlos laughed softly. "I guess not." They continued walking, the years behind them filled with triumphs, struggles, and quiet moments of peace. Together, they had built a life they were proud of, and as the sun set behind them, they knew that this was their true victory. The legacy of their love would live on forever, not in history books, but in the hearts of everyone who had ever believed in the power of love to change the world. And as they stood there, watching the sky turn to shades of pink and gold, Maximilian knew that no matter what came next, they had already won. Because love, in its truest form, was the greatest victory of all.